This is the story of 2007, and it's even
crazier
than you realize. Let's go. What is going on, everybody? It's me again, Golden Blue Dude, and if you haven't already, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button, and if you're already a subscriber, don't forget to share these videos. 2007 is one of the craziest years in college football. It was back whenever national championship could be won by pretty much anybody, and this was the year where everybody got super close to getting to that national championship game before it was snatched away, my team included. We start off with the first week AP Top 25. USC was the heavy favorite to win the national championship. Almost everybody became national championship contenders at one point in this season. Well, 2007 got off to a crazy start. The first upset of the year happened in week 1. Number 5 Michigan gets beat by Appalachian State at home, and this was back when Appalachian State was not even heard of. Nobody knew who Appalachian State was. Who is this team that just beat Michigan in the Big House? It was a massive upset. So much of an upset that it knocked Michigan completely out of the AP Top 25. Besides that, not much else was going on as far as big upsets yet. The crazy thing is, West Virginia started the preseason number 3 in the nation. We had high expectations in Morgantown in 2007. We move on to week 2. Not a whole lot happening. A little bit of shuffling going on in the top 10, but no big upsets. The only thing that we notice is USC starts to lose first place votes. They go from 62 to 59. I know, that's only 3, but that trend will continue. We move on to week 3. Same thing. A little bit of movement here and there. Not really any big upsets, but USC loses more first place votes from 59 to 40. Week 4, pretty much the same scenario. A little bit of shuffling going on in the top 10. Nothing really significant happening yet. Week 5 is where some interesting things really start happening. USC loses 3 first place votes. They're still solidly number 1 with 43 first place votes. But number 3, Oklahoma goes on the road and loses to Colorado as heavy favorites. But to go along with that, number 4, Florida loses to Auburn at home as heavy favorites. Number 5, West Virginia goes on the road and loses to number 18, South Florida, picking up their first loss. This will play a significant role later in the season. This is where the craziness really begins. We look at week 6. Florida falls all the way down to number 9. Oklahoma falls all the way down to number 10. And West Virginia fell all the way down to number 13. And there's a switching at the top. LSU finally overtakes Ohio State at that number 1 spot, only by 1 vote, 33 to 32. That's also the same week that the number 2 Trojans lose at home to Stanford. That was a massive upset. And in the same week, an undefeated number 5 Wisconsin loses to Illinois on the road. More mayhem is coming, guys. We look at week 7, and because of that huge upset, Illinois jumps all the way up to number 18, and Wisconsin plunges all the way down to number 19. USC barely stays in the top 10 at that number 10 spot. So what happens in week 7? Well, LSU goes on the road and loses to an unranked Kentucky. Big upset. And then newly number 2 Cal loses to Oregon State at home, and that sends their season into a tailspin. In week 8, Cal drops all the way to number 8, and LSU drops down to number 4. And because of some big wins, South Florida is all the way up to number 2. But as soon as South Florida grabs that 2 spot, guess what? They go on the road and lose to Rutgers. Another big upset for the number 2 team in the nation. So we look at week 9, and South Florida drops all the way down to number 10 because of that loss. And that puts Boston College up at the number 2 spot. Now we're on week 10, and the number 2 team gets hit again. Number 2 Boston College loses at home to an unranked Florida State team. This is what I was saying. A lot of teams got super close trying to get into the national championship. We look at week 11, and the number 1 team, Ohio State, they lose at home to Illinois, which makes them fall to number 7 in week 12. If you notice in week 12, Kansas keeps creeping up and up and up, and at this point, they're number 3 in the nation, undefeated in week 12. But of course, in week 2, the number 2 team is Oregon, and what happens? they take a loss to Arizona on the road, which makes them fall all the way down to number 9 in week 13. We look at the rankings for week number 13, Kansas all the way up to, the dreaded number 2 spot. And yes, they grab a loss to number 4, Missouri. But that's not a bad loss. Out of all the losses I've seen, that's probably the best loss of anybody. In that same week, number 1 LSU loses to Arkansas at home in triple overtime. So now we look at week 14. Kansas drops down to number 5. LSU drops all the way down to number 7. This is where some mayhem really happens. The first thing is number 1 Missouri loses to number 9 Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship, and this is where one of the biggest upsets in history happens as well. West Virginia, the new number 2 team in the nation, loses to Pitt at home, an unranked Pitt, a 28-point favorite, and knocks them out of the national championship. And this is what sets up the final polls for week 15 to set up the national championship. Because of that, Missouri fell to number 6. West Virginia fell all the way down to number 9. Ohio State climbs from number 11 all the way up to number 1, even though they lost to Illinois. LSU clawed their way back up to number 2, and we have number 1 Ohio State at 11-1 versus number 2 LSU at 11-2. Guess what? Another mild upset happens to end the season. Number 2 LSU beats number 1 Ohio State and claims the 2007 national championship. But if you look at the week 15 rankings, look at how many teams had 2 losses. And then I look at the 8 spot, Kansas, only 1 loss. Why did they fall so far? I know they didn't make it to the Big 12 championship because of that loss to Missouri, but I think they got punished just a little too much for that. I think Kansas should have been closer to the top on that. And we look at the bowl season, and they win their BCS Bowl and finish the season number 7 in the nation. I know West Virginia had the talent to win the national championship that year, but as far as the team that got screwed the most in 2007, I would have to say is Kansas. They were a 1-loss team. They had a great record, a great resume, but because they didn't make the Big 12 championship, they got punished even more than a 2-loss team. And it just so happens that LSU was a 2-loss team and won the national championship because of circumstances, not necessarily because they were the best team in the nation. Who really knows who the best team in the nation was in 2007? They just got there because of circumstances and were able to take advantage of those circumstances. But 2007 in general, I'd say any one of those top 15 teams could have won a national championship, except for Florida, Tennessee, and Auburn. 9-4, that's not a very good record. But the rest, I think, definitely could have been national championship contenders. Now, if you look at 2007 and you look at these days, it's completely different. You really have only maybe 6 or 7 teams that even have a chance to get to the playoffs and win a national championship. And really, it's usually Alabama or Clemson. Those days where literally any of the top 20 teams could win a national championship are behind us for now. But the law of averages always even out. I think the chaos years will come back and we'll see more chaos like we saw in 2007. That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.